Hi, good morning. Thank you for coming to our session. I'm Faith. I'm from the Human Rights Resource Center, and I'm here to give you a very selective and what David hopes will be a very brief overview of our research entitled Keeping the Faith, a study of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion in ASEAN. Okay, so ASEAN is comprised of 10 member states. We have Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Brunei, and the Philippines. Very broadly speaking, in terms of religion, it's very diverse. But speaking very broadly again, to the southern part of the region is mostly dominated by Islam, with the exception of Singapore and eastern parts, some eastern parts of Malaysia. This region was previously known as the Malay Archipelago. To the northern part, this part of the region is dominated by Buddhism, Taoism, and what is known as Chinese religions or traditional religions. Although I should point out that with regard to Vietnam, mostly people are irreligious. So 70% of the population do not identify with any religion. To the east, we have the Philippines, which is largely Christian. So 90% of the Philippines is comprised of Christians, mostly Roman Catholic. And the rationale for this book is that in 2012, the heads of state of the ASEAN member states signed the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, uniformly affirming and committing to respect, promote, and protect human rights. And it also mentioned specifically that every person has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and that all forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred based on religion and beliefs shall be eliminated. So we thought that this is a very commendable political aspiration, and so we came up with this book, and it's comprised of 10 country reports, and each country report covers legislative and policy framework, the trends in freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So we look at prevalence of discrimination, persecution, how states react when these things happen, and how it affects bordering countries. And then we also look at contributing factors. And then with these country reports, our team leader collated and produced a synthesis report highlighting the general trends in the region. So moving on to some of our findings. In terms of international instruments, as we know, many of the substantive norms when it comes to freedom of religion and belief stems from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now, if you look at the chart that we have on the screen, so the BRN, just reading the headings in the column, so that's Brunei Darussalam, KHM is Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So with regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, only 6 countries have signed this. And even with the 6, one, Laos, PDR, made a reservation saying that with regard to Article 18, which is the provision on freedom of religion and belief, Laos, PDR said that, let me see. How does it work? Laos PDR said that anyway, what it said was that with regard to Article 18, this is going to be observed as long as it does not cause disharmony among its different societies. So if your acts causes disunity or disharmony, then they will consider that Article 18 is not to be applicable. You also have other instruments that have provisions that relate to freedom of religion and belief. And as you can see from the chart, ASEAN countries are mostly hesitant or reluctant when it comes to signing on to international conventions. The only instruments that the ASEAN countries universally signed are the CRC and the CEDAW, the one on women and the one on children. But even then, with regard to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, 3 countries made reservation, and these are Malaysia. Malaysia made a reservation with respect to Article 14, which guarantees the right of the child to freedom of religion and belief. Brunei made a reservation to the provisions that are contrary to the principles of Islam, and Singapore said that it makes reservations to provisions that are contrary to the religions and values of its many religions and races. So similarly with the CEDAW, reservations were also made on the basis that we can say of religion by also of these 3 countries, by Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei. Moving on, we also looked at the Constitution of the countries, of the 10 countries. And we found out that religious freedom is a very important commitment for ASEAN member states. It is legally guaranteed in all constitutions except for Brunei Darussalam. So if you look at the wordings, all other countries would describe freedom of religion as a right, something that they guarantee. But if you look at Brunei Darussalam, it merely says that the official religion of Brunei Darussalam shall be Islamic religion. All other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony with Islam. And when they talk about Islam, it's a very specific sect, which is the Sunni Shafi'ite sect of Islam. And this constitutional provision is really expressed in policy and in practice in Brunei, because when it attained independence in the early 1980s, the Sultan said that Brunei shall be forever Melayu Islam Beraja, which means that they are Malay Islamic monarchy. So ever since then, they have rejected legal pluralism, liberalism, and freedom of religion. With regard to declared state-religion relationship, 5 out of 10 countries have constitutions that expressly or implicitly privilege the majority religion, or that privilege one religion as the religion of the majority. So these are Brunei, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Myanmar, so the ones on this side. So the constitutions of Brunei, Cambodia, and Malaysia contain clauses outrightly declaring a state religion. So for Brunei, it's Islam. For Cambodia, it's Buddhism. And for Malaysia, it's Islam also. Thailand and Myanmar privilege religion, which is Buddhism, in their constitutions, but stop short of declaring them a state religion. With regard to Indonesia, what it says is that the state shall be based upon the belief in the one and only God. So while the constitution does not expressly refer to a religion, it nonetheless privileges monotheistic belief. And also perhaps later Pak Agus will also say that aside from that, Indonesia actually recognizes only 6 religions. With regard to Laos, PDR, Singapore, and Vietnam, they don't make any reference to religion. They leave open to the possibility that the state may control or privilege one religion or another. But generally, Singapore practices secularism. And what we observe in practice is that for Vietnam and Laos PDR, they allow you to practice so long as you don't go against their national interests. Like that, you don't touch national unity. You don't go against you don't create disunity, and you don't go against a social order. So the Philippines is the unique country in ASEAN, and it expressly states that the separation of church and state shall be inviolable. Because this is a symposium on social stability, I will highlight very quickly some countries that are facing social conflict based on religion. So first is Malaysia, where minorities or dissenters within Islam are facing some forms of persecution. So apostates who want to convert out of Islam are detained for rehabilitation. And then non-Orthodox or non-Sunni Muslims are also prosecuted for deviant teaching. So if you go against the Sunni teachings, which is the religion of the majority, then you can go to jail, you can be arrested for deviant teachings. And also there has been persecution of Shia Muslims, or harassments intentions are being committed against them. With regard to non-Muslim religious minorities, there has been symbolic violence. So there has been demolitions of places of worship and restrictions of worship. So within the last 10 years, around 6 churches were demolished, and around 12 Indian Hindu temples were also demolished. And among these Hindu temples is a 1,200-year-old Kandi or tomb. And they said that the basis for this demolition is that they don't have a permit. But if you look at it, when was the Malaysian state? When did Malaysia become a state? If you talk about a 1,000-year-old Kandi, then they predate the Malaysian state. So who would they get the permit from? And then also within the last years, I'm sure you've all heard of this controversy over the Allah case, where a court said that because traditionally in Malaysia, when they speak in Bahasa, they will refer to God as Allah, even if they're Christians. And there was a case where the court said that, okay, you can use the word Allah in your publication. And then this gave rise to a lot of destructions of churches, of Sikh temples, and also of Muslim mosques, but mostly the target was the Christian churches. With regard to Myanmar, there was a significant increase of violence since 2012 when they moved towards democratization. So the most extensively documented is the one of the Rohingya Muslims in the northern Rakhine state, where they suffer lack of the right to citizenship, restrictions on freedom of movement, obstacles to family development, confiscations of land, forced labor, arbitrary taxation, and exclusion from the local economy. So from 2012 to 2013, there were a lot of news reports about riots being committed in Myanmar. And as we can see on the chart, the causes for these riots are varied. So the first one, there was a rape of Tida Tue, who was a Buddhist. She was raped by Muslims, and this just gave rise to riots with people when the news spread out, and people just started going, burning houses and attacking other people. So the total casualties are around 245. This includes both Muslims and Buddhists. And then we also highlight Indonesia, where after the Reformasi in 1998, there was an increase of communal violence between the Muslims and Christians. But this was okay. But in 2003 and 2004, peace agreements were entered into, and this abated the violence. But afterwards, we still see sporadic sporadic violence committed against the Ahmadiyya Muslims. So there's a fatwa or a directive that says that Ahmadiyyas are outside Islam, and it calls for the ban of the Ahmadiyyas, and there were attacks on mosques and other properties of the Ahmadiyyas. Also, with regard to the Shia Muslims, there were increased calls for them to be banned also, and there were violent attacks being committed against followers of Shia Muslims. And then other groups, to a lesser extent, that face religious persecution would include Muslim groups that are outside the majority Islam sect, and then the Aliran, Kepercayaan, and also the Christians. Now, what we have to understand with Indonesia is that different provinces have different religious majorities. So for instance, in one province, it might be the Muslims who are persecuted, while in another province, it might be the Christians. So it doesn't mean that all over the country, the Christians are being persecuted or the Ahmadiyyas are being persecuted. Okay, and then lastly, we highlight Brunei, because in our study, what we noted was that among all the 10 ASEAN countries, it was Singapore and Brunei that did not have incidences of persecution. But with Brunei, it's kind of worrying because this signals that there's a general lack of political and civic space for dissent instead of people actually getting along. But it was really a sign of suppression. And also, we highlight Brunei because of the Sharia penal code, the challenge that it will bring, because it will be applicable to both Muslims and non-Muslims. So right now, they are in phase 1, which carries penalties that are comprised of fines and imprisonment. But when they roll out phase 2, that will include cutting off of limbs and I think whipping, caning. And then when they move to phase 3, then you'll have death by stoning. So for instance, for blasphemy, which applies to both Muslims and non-Muslims who are found to have insulted the Prophet, they could be sentenced to death or to a maximum of 30 years of imprisonment and 40 strokes if they do not repent. So, and also if apostasy will be outlawed and punishable by death by stoning. And then sexual conduct such as extramarital sex, homosexual intercourse, and sexual intercourse against the order of nature is criminalized and punishable by death by stoning. So I'll just enumerate because I know I'm out of time. So factors influencing persecution and or discrimination. So for the ASEAN region, what we thought really affects freedom of religion and persecution of minorities, we really emphasize politicization of religion, and then ethno-religious nationalism, and also weak rule of law. Thank you very much, David.